Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Wow!
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Art of Adversity podcast. My name is Jessica DePazzi, and today we have, again, Jeff DePazzi, back by popular demand. Hi, Jeff.
I
Welcome.
voted yes. One of one vote. Thank
The
you.
one vote won. Congratulations.
Yes, it's all it takes sometimes.
How has watching your sister's kids been this last month? You've been on daddy duty.
I have. Oh, you know, I don't see what all the fuss is about. Kids are easy, you know? It's just the only thing you got to keep in mind, and it's simple, is that every single thing you do with them will impact them for the rest of their lives. So it could have a positive or a negative impact. So it's super easy, you know?
Super easy. And
Uh,
then picking them up from
Super
school and
easy.
all of that, that's easy, right?
Yeah, the day in the full attention that you have to give them all the time, and the sacrificing yourself, it's all so easy. So
So it's
it's
been
been a
good.
breeze. It's been good. They are good little kids. They're intelligent, and they're fun and funny, funny
That's good.
looking. No, I'm just kidding. It's
Okay.
been interesting for
I don't
sure.
think they watch the show. All right. So today we're talking about constriction and acceptance. We thought this would be a great one to talk about because it encompasses one of the pillars of our organization, the Art of Adversity and the Special Forces experience. And that is the pillar is acceptance, not contraction. Sorry, my cats are going crazy here. Can you hear them?
Constriction. I can see them. I can't
Okay.
really hear them.
All right. So the pillar being acceptance, not constriction. And one of the reasons why this is part of our organization is because it came from our friend Richard Rudd, who put this really great quote together that we've parsed apart into values of ours. And that quote is, wounded from the outset, you must do battle with your shadows, overcome the limitations of your mind, surrender your need to control life, and find your true self before you can awaken. And so this quote, taken from the Gene Keys, summarizes the drama of the human experience. It's called The Ring of Humanity. And it's broken up into six parts of that sentence. And so what we're going to be talking about today is that first part, wounded from the outset, right? And this is stuff we've come into the world with through our gestation period from our relatives, past and present, through our ancestors. So actually, I think that is kind of apt that we started off with your your experience with watching over the kids because what a great lesson in constriction. You know, what a remarkable experience to have your sister's kids for an entire month to be able to bond and all of that, but you were also met with some challenges that are of the purest form. You know, there's nothing inherently bad or anything negative about kids, but a lot of the systems that are wrapped into taking care of them and the consequences of, like you were saying, what you do and don't do really do impact them. So I can imagine that there were some things coming up for you there.
Yeah, I would add to your wounded from the onset, we inherit this culture around us as well. And some people like to think that what is outside of us doesn't impact us as deeply and profoundly as it does, but we inherit these traditions, these values, these systems, this net that's cast around us before we're even born, that to a certain extent, I don't want to demonize it. I'm not going to make a moral kind of debate for it, but can constrict us, can start that constriction. And some of that, like you said, with my sister's kids, you mentioned specifically school and these institutions that we build that are designed to make our lives easier. I just think that coming into it with this different lens, because I'm not a parent, it becomes very obvious that we do these things that actually add more tension in our life as opposed to removing it. And like you said, that starts gestation, that starts as our epigen, as our DNA is being wound into us. It comes ancestrally and then through our lives and then through our lives experience, and it slowly constricts us away from ultimately ourselves and then disconnecting us from others.
Yeah, totally. And another thing that I wanted to add there is that talking about something quoted as being wounded from the outset, it might sound like a bit of a bummer, but I feel as if it's actually a grounding truth to know that this is part of our holistic human experience. Everybody has it, everybody comes with it, and we all experience it. So acceptance of these constrictions is really the first step in setting off on our journey, on our path. You know, there's so much research out there and stories that explain how avoidance of our shadowy behavior or negative emotions or anything that's unpleasant in our lives just starts to build up. I don't quite understand the logic around why acceptance needs to be step one. Maybe you can talk to a little bit about that. We can maybe brainstorm on that.
Yeah. Can certainly anecdotally explore that. I don't know if it's necessarily, I know you're not really being like, hey, this is step one of the recipe for, you know, removing the shackles of constriction that shrink us down into an existence that most people are not really pleased with, and or cause the discord, the drama machine that is the distraction era of, well, I'm just not going to face it. Positive vibes only. I'm just going to ignore it and I'm going to avoid it and avoid it and avoid it, which is also a form of non-acceptance. You know, I, if there is, I don't believe like you were actually trying to say there's a genesis point of like you do acceptance and then it's game time. Because, you know, something
I
like
mean, it's
courage, having the
earlier on
courage.
though.
Oh, it certainly is. Like even in grief patterns, anything like that, the thing with acceptance is you regain ownership. You're saying, I own this. In this case, we're talking about, you know, shadow patterns or wounds. I own this. You know, I own this feeling. And when you start to take ownership of it, instead of like putting it outside of you, you can regain your agency. And then what you can do with that is begin the creative process of integrating it into yourself or disintegrating it in out of yourself. And it's probably most likely a combination of the two. I don't think in my experience, have ever seen the complete dissolution of a shadow energy
Yeah,
or
to
there's
be
like a
like
complete integration. Yeah, it's one or the other.
totally. You know, it reminds me of something that I was talking with a friend the other day about that period of my life in grade school where I was bullied, right? And I was in complete isolation for 4 years of my life, like ate lunch alone every single day and didn't tell my parents about it. Didn't everybody at school knew about it, but didn't tell my parents about it because I wanted them to be proud of me. I wanted to show up as a perfect daughter. And so this wasn't like it has shown up in different situations, this trauma from my past, but it wasn't since I started being alone more and now like going into more of this lone wolf era and really understanding who Jessica is solo that when I would eat now, I I feel like I'm gonna cry and I get this welling up of emotion and it took me probably a year and a half to really come to terms with, okay, this is a thing for me and um by no means have I healed this trauma from my past. I've definitely done a lot of good work on it. But even still, something that I've known was an issue in my life, and I thought I'd been doing work on it and felt like I was getting pretty close to that not being a problem showing up in my social life so much anymore, my internal life. Like there's something new that popped up, right? And so it's been what, like, I don't know how old I was at that point, but decades of getting to this point of even noticing that this new thing is now a problem, right? And even hesitate to say a problem because it's going to open up so many more great avenues in my life once I can resolve this. But my acceptance process is now just starting. So the step one that I'm talking about Yeah, it can be like a multi-decade experience because we can be really good at not even noticing when things are coming up or pushing them to the side until we're confronted by them.
Yeah. And I would imagine that pattern confronted you many times throughout those decades. Like if you were to kind of sit in silence, if you will, or whatever, or even, you know, having a conversation with someone and start to parse it apart and work backwards, you would see all these points where it tried to confront you. That obviously very formidable years. I mean, they're all formidable. Very formidable years, though, started to shape you. It started to shape a lot of different dynamics, a lot of different facets. This is one facet of it where you were starting this pattern of removal and not even, properly sitting with it for all those years. And so what I was going to get at, Jess, is, you said acceptance is the first stage. There was a lot of stages in there though that were also part of it. And that's where sometimes I think we might get confused and maybe even apply shame to it, is like, well, part of the process was you learning all the shitty ways it shows up for you and for people around you. You know, we often think
Mm.
our own individual survival mechanisms are perfect. Our ego does that tricky little magic show where it's like, well, it's my survival mechanism. It has to be perfect. And it's like, yeah, but you know, it's easy when you're a total asshole and people can see it. It's when it's really subtle where it's like, oh, damn, this thing has influenced my life in all these ways. What was step one? Getting the wound, being like, okay, say your soul decided to take on these challenges. Like, this is where I'll get it, or not. It could be just random chaos and chance. But is that step one? And then going through all the shit of adopting a shadow pattern, you know?
Mm.
But like you said, though, if you really want to tip the scales into understanding it, you have to be like, okay, I can sit with these emotions. They're huge though, right? When you actually sit with emotions, I don't, I think out of anyone, you probably know this about me, but I'm an emotional person. I feel
Yes, you
emotions pretty
are.
deep. Okay. Thank you. There it is. It's set on the record. I have emotions. And however, though, it doesn't matter what human it is, when they actually sit with the depth of their emotions, especially painful ones, even joyful ones, I mean, they can be so overwhelming. However, when you sit with the depths of the painful ones, you start to realize, oh, yeah, there's a reason whatever 12-year-old, 10-year-old Jess couldn't sit with this, because it's massive. It's on a scale with inputs, because it wasn't just isolation, it was all the other micro facets that started to shape you. And it's like, you're just learning how to, not maybe just learning, but you're learning the art of communication and these different forms of understanding kind of time and space and where you sit in it and how you relate to it. And so it's like, yeah, I had to go through all these years to really like, okay, here we go. Um, the key, I think, and this is, to kind of play it back into, like the special forces experience or the art of adversity more specifically, is realizing that you do have constrictions. There is no perfectly enlightened being. Maybe perfect enlightenment is achieved when you die, and you return to the stream of consciousness that is the universe or God or whatever. But until that point, you have constrictions, these patterns that are going to show up as defense mechanisms that impact yourself, those around you in the world in a, I would argue, I'm not saying like I'm going to go to the grave for it, but in a negative way. Um, and we're, I think, as a species, really coming to a head with that right now, where
Totally. It's a calling, right? To come to face and to confront these things because we have the time and the safety to do that. It's a really great time to be alive. Talking about our
I like that.
experience. Thank you. I mean, talking about our experience is being way more accepted now these days. And if it wasn't for the conversations that I'm able to have with friends that I trust, people that I trust, I could very easily stay in a place of shame, you know, uh, unless my inner willingness to understand this work and to embody this work is so powerful that I can believe it myself But I think the majority of us need people to bounce, people that we trust to bounce these things off of, to understand a little bit of the reflection of what we're sharing. I just pulled up the levels of
Mhm.
consciousness by why can I never remember his name?
David Hawkins.
David Hawkins, yeah. And you had brought up shame. Absolutely. Especially given what I do for a living. Sometimes, which is ironic because I talk about shadow work all the time and how we must accept them. But when I find myself in a shadow pattern that feels really deep and something that I haven't noticed before at 36, I'm like, shame is often a place that I go to because I'm like, I should have a lot more of this figured out. But that's the exact opposite of what I teach, So embodiment of this work from a personal level can be difficult without other people that get it. And I think if we were to play with schemas, which I think are really important in these conversations that can be a little bit complex, we're talking about like step one, but then there are like 10 billion steps inside of that. The levels of consciousness are really nice to look at because it can show us on a scale of levels of consciousness, like what we might be experiencing, so we know where we are in the plot and to know that that's all okay and that there's a progression available to us.
Yeah. And I would add, because I am going to circle back, but I would add to it's not just knowing like I'm at this level of consciousness because shame, Mother Nature didn't really mess up when she gave us shame. It's how we project from that space, how much we feel it, and how much we allow ourselves to stay in these certain states of consciousness because we're supposed to ebb and flow. That's the orbit of the rhythm of the probably the universe.
Hmm.
And however, we can get caught in those lower places. I'm a systems guy, so I tend to think our systems need to be revamped. But the first system that we really have to look at, the first step of service is going into yourself and then worry about projecting that outwards. Like, because I do want to give like that shout out to the OGs, as you said. A lot of people like to be like, all these people before us. What you mentioned about time, the time and space to actually give a proper observation. Um, and that's also a pattern of constriction. Constriction, it kind of reminds me of when they're trying to gather quantum data. Every time they take a flash of that data, it creates a false reality and it changes the outcome. And that's what happens. Constriction gives you a very short, it's myopic, but it's also small lens to look through, and it's just a snapshot. And it's not unless we break those patterns, because constriction pulls you into the lower states of consciousness. That's what fear does. It's a survival adaptation so that you do focus on what could be the problem, right? Not,
Mm-hmm.
but it's we get caught in that too. And so, yeah, we do have to. Right now, people like to demonize the past, but it's like let's hold a little compassion at all levels. Here, I'm going to try something out right now before you chime in, Jess. You know, it's very easy to demonize someone like Hitler. However, if you look at his life and you look at the torrent that he went through that shaped him, because he didn't come into the world and be like, you know what? I'm choosing every facet of what's going to impact me. But he had defeat after defeat. And, um, you know, again, this isn't to justify his behavior, but like instead of like just spending all this time shaming people, let's look at, well, what created that pattern? What created that pattern? And I think the more people do that, the more they'll really realize that the nations that they sit within are still actually projecting a lot from those patterns. We've just adapted a little bit more of a model of tolerance towards it and to tolerate it in ourselves and tolerate it in others. And tolerance, I don't know where it would sit on a level of consciousness, but it is certainly not above acceptance. It's below acceptance because you're tolerating it. You're not accepting it. You're not seeing how you fit into that, as you said, that mirror with other people that can keep you caught in that pattern.
Yeah. I mean, I know you'd be the first person to not tolerate uh, Hitler's choices, given, I mean, you're like fully a Jeff and I always get in this conversation around free will versus destiny. And you read that book on determinism and you had a lot of ideas on that. Yeah, we come in with a lot of baggage, just given everything you just said. And then we also have choices, right? But those choices are greatly influenced by what we've been given. But we can look at, like, I watch a lot of true crime, it's my vice, and have reasons for that, but they're not good excuses. But there are people that make choices that are, and a lot of people have similar upbringings and they don't make those choices, right? So that's why getting into acceptance
Yeah.
early to bring it back is so important, because let's just say we're going down Hitler's path here, which is interesting, but let's just say he accepted some of these defeats as moments of growth rather than being in a victim abuser consciousness. That would have been incredibly different if he would have been born into
Exactly.
a family that encouraged whatever power he had, because he was influential and he was powerful. The amount of good that man could have done is unthinkable if he chose a different way, if he was born a different way or nurtured a different way.
Yeah, and we could go into like the devil's advocate of like what good did come from the motions of Nazism and World War II, And again, I'm not
Well,
trying to like this is not for the monkey minds out who might be like, well, do they support Nazis and Hitler? Because this is not what that is. It's just it's like that shame cycle, right? And if you look at something with a tiny little view with a dualistic lens, of course, because that's what happens. You snapshot one side or the other, and then you try to deny the reality of everything else, and it gets messy. And then that's where we're like in a big, I think, confrontation right now. And it's kind of interesting, with a lot of what we do, we have this like small little paradoxical, seemingly backwards thing where we actually think that one of the things you can do to break constriction is get more constricted, is to so what happens is people get addicted to their survival mechanisms and they actually feel safe. Even like in the realms of PTSD, people often won't break out of them because it's what they know. And it's like, well, I'm still kind of surviving, so I'm not going to stop. And it's hard for the ego to let go of that. But what happens is if you constrict it down to where boom, the illusion can be fractured,
mm,
then you can start to backfill it with your patterns. And I love this discussion because I think that most of the world doesn't think they're a victim to someone else's dream or nightmare. They
mm.
think that they have full agency and they kind of like beep boop through the world and like I'm making these choices. And you mentioned Determinism by Sapolsky, and I kind of wanted to like flip the book over because I love the idea of you know part of achieving destiny. Like I was saying to you the other day, destiny is where your alignment and fate meet, but you have to participate in it. Um, and I didn't finish the whole book yet, but he's like very like it's cause and effect. It's cause and effect. And it's like, well, I just can't wrap my head around that. Yes, way more than most people like to think, physiologically, psychologically, it is. And that's why it's so important to rebuild these conceptual frameworks from which we are working from. But once again, our old friend constriction, non-acceptance, are blocking the other paradigm. People are tenaciously grabbing to what they might kind of generously call tradition or the way it was. And it's like, well, in order for the species to reach more harmony within ourselves and others, we have to break those old constrictive patterns. And again, like you said, it's not a shame thing. It's time to march together in a different direction.
It's part of our holistic experience. Not a very pleasant one, but it's part of it. And it exists for a reason. You brought up um, what good did come from the Holocaust. Now, what a sentence to say, first of all. And I actually think that we're going to get flagged on YouTube for saying some of these naughty words. But the post-traumatic growth studies have shown that anytime in history where there's been a collective trauma, we've seen huge leaps in consciousness and growth. And that's not to validate the collective trauma, the cause of the collective trauma, but it's how we grow is by experiencing trials. And as we experience trials collectively as a group or through natural disasters, we also see people coming together in community and in prayer and gaining new wisdom and new insights and new forms of compassion and inner strength and all kinds of things. So it's a controversial topic because a lot of the narrative is focused on the bad thing that happened, And so what we strive to do with the art of adversity and post-traumatic growth is to understand, well, like Luke says, like our director says, you know, what if we traded our suffering for wisdom? Because that does seem like that's the game that we've been born to play. So,
Yes. If I could, oh, sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. I did want to go back to something you
Well,
had
I
said.
was gonna like, unfortunately, so, you know, if we tie this back to Gene Keys, it's constriction, acceptance, and then universal love. So really, if we look at that, it's like all these fear-based patterns on one side, and then this access to a more love-based pattern. And that's the paradigm we need to operate out of more in order to diffuse these situations better, but also build from them better. But that's not to say that on first, wisdom, true wisdom is hard earned. Experience makes it hard on you to earn wisdom. And, like look at like Viktor Frankl, like how much has he impacted from those experiences? And I'm the first person, and this is like and like the guy is like in the 50s and he's trapped in the chair and he's like, I'm not crazy. This is the part where I don't know why I feel crazy saying it, but I do, is we don't have to learn from those. Like we have a whole other set of options we can learn from. It's just people are really, really like, even the conversation of what is love, what are the factors of love? When we look, my my sister has a pillow here that has all the emotions on it, and it's like a pie chart. It's quite lovely. One wedge of it is like love based and like kind of like they call it happiness, and then all the rest are like sad and disgusted and this and that, and it's like there's way more to this picture here. We just like, why are we framing it like this? And it's like this doomed loop we seem to be like
Hmm.
wanting to break free of right now. And it is nice. You did mention it. It is that time where we have more space. Technology is slowly um getting in line with what it's supposed to do, which is allow us more access to a thriving state instead of causing us more headaches and stress and inadequacies. That's because of the consciousness that's been bred into it, of course. But it's starting, right? It's like it's starting to make these sound bites and quotes and philosophies and little access and little glimmers of wisdom more accessible to people around the world who may not even be able to bust out of a pure survival state. People like,
Yeah.
what is it like? Half the world's population is still hungry. It's hard to achieve enlightenment. I mean, yeah, you could have like a near death experience, a DMT rush, and you might feel that level of enlightenment and, find some new answers and whatnot. That seems to be a pretty cool thing to do for a lot of the old prophets. But it's hard to really thrive when you're like, I'm hungry, or it's hard to thrive when you never feel like you're enough. It's hard to thrive. And those are all constrictive factors, right? And yeah, I don't know where I was really going with that, but
That's okay. I have a question for you. If we can, I want to talk about constriction from a tactical and like practical application sense. So in the military, you had brought up something about, looking through your attention is modulated to the thing that you fear or that you feel pain around, right? You have this little peephole that you're looking through, and your whole world, your whole experience kind of gets shrunken down into whatever it is that you're trying to avoid or run from or fight or something like that, which
Mhm.
leaves us with very little experience to enjoy the rest of the things or to even capture additional information that may help us understand this little thing that our attention is modulated on. So from a military perspective, what are some of the um, tools you guys would use or some of the systems or, you know, charts? Like I'm thinking like going the black. Like that was one of the things that you had taught me when we'd be rock climbing or something. And I'm like, I'm freaking out internally, starting to sweat,
Mhm.
and I'm very focused on things that don't matter, So can you talk through a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can't remember who invented it, but it was a pilot, and he talked about the states of, I think he called it like the states of awareness or something. And it starts at like the white, you're really relaxed and calm, you feel totally safe, and then yellows and reds and oranges all the way up to the black. And it's kind of an interesting, a really simplified version of your state of consciousness. And what I mean by that is physiologically, because it was very heavily based on physiology, you know, what happens when fatigue sets in, when your heart rates go up, all these factors. As your heart rate, though, as like a really big marker goes up and you move more towards fight and flight, you move to the black, closer and closer to the black. And what happens is like you're literally doing this. You're like, the problem's so big, the problem's so big, this problem's so important. I got to focus on it. I got to focus on it. I got to focus on it. And then eventually you black out and then you go into like pure autopilot. And it's really interesting to see people move through time and space when they're in the pure black. Because what is in there is what has been pre-programmed. Now the military calls it a little something like drills, all nice like, but it's conditioning. It's conditioning you to go kill. You know, to be like, oh, okay, the only solution is to kill, which seems psychotic. You know, like that's the best we can do.
No wonder you guys have
Anyhow,
stuff
though,
to deal with after the military.
so that's what happens though. You constrict down so often. Well, actually, I noted it, the term chasing the dragon, or like the pipe hitters or something in the SF world, where you chase it because what does happen, what is kind of like oddly soothing, is the world's, it's almost like a aggressive form of mindfulness gets small and then all the other noises go away. It's like, I just have to do this thing, you know? That's my reality. It's this big now. It's like, it's literally that much. And, you know, in this day and age of it's so much, it can be a really insane form of escapism. It's a very reactive form of escapism, an extreme form. And, you know, that's, I think, used against people, you know. What I mean by that is, like, I talk to a lot of ex-service members. A lot of them have PTSD. A lot of them have like these ultimate forms of constriction. And it's I think one of the reasons is not just concussive damages or access to toxin or exposure to toxins and alcohol, all the degenerative factors and this and that, but it's also when you do go into that world, the deep, dark underworld, you're supposed to bring back some wisdom. That's the point of going into the underworld, whether it's within yourself or on this like collective level, is to come back and be like, hey, wait a minute. This is the risk reward, if you want to like put it down to 2 words, of doing this action. And I believe that one of the things that a lot of soldiers are struggling with is it's like, oh shit, you know, my values don't overlap with this. This is prehistoric. You know, mammals kill, not mammals, humans kill 6 times more of their own species than any other mammal on the planet. Why do we do that? Aren't we so elevated, intelligent? You know, like we just, again, like I get it. We've kind of like got ourselves in a, what's that?
Yeah, that sucks. That's an ugly stat.
Like these mammals that have less brains have better relationships with the world around them. And lots of them have to kill to eat. You know, think about that. They're killing out of necessity. They don't have, you know, a lion's not going to go plant in a garden and eating berries and stuff. You know, it's perfect harmony in doing that. And yet we still have this rate that's so much higher. We don't even eat each other. Not saying we should.
Oh my God. I feel like every time we get on the mic, we just say stuff that I'm just like constantly thinking, do I cut this out because it's too much? But I never do because whatever. We're all thinking it, right?
Yeah.
Where do you experience people going into the black at the process? So for any of you who don't know, we run a 5-day, which used to be an 8-day event, which is now a 5-day event called The Process. This year we're running it next year, April. I'm not getting any of this right. I think it's May of 2025.
No, you do not. It's okay though. The calendar knows when.
Spring 2025, we're running another event called the Wild Card Edition, which if you wanted to look up what the details are for that or even apply, you can go to the specialforcesexperience.com and you can find information there. So anyway, it's a very, very difficult event. And so Jeff, we've seen people go into the black there. What's happening to get them there without sharing too much about the experience? And how do you see people coming out of it?
Yeah. What's the benefit, right? What's
Yeah.
the so what? It's like one thing to stress people out for funsies, you know, I think they call that torture. Um, but it's like, it's a whole other paradigm to use it in a loving way. Um, yeah, I won't go too much into that because there's a lot of people out there who want to do good and would use this information irresponsibly. That's what I think. That's what I truly believe. So I don't like to put it all out there, like all our secret sauce, if you will.
Mm.
I will say this, the secretest of the secret sauces is create a container of love and really sit with that. Okay, how do I create an environment that is the ultimate in constriction, the opposite of love and connection? It's disconnection and fracture, and hold a space of love. You know, think about that. That's a paradox. If you don't have a paradoxical mind, just steer clear of this stuff for a bit, you know? Um, so a lot of it goes around though, like tensions on Maslowian needs, you know, squeezing those and certain priming, neural priming, mental priming, however you want to call it. You know, the mind is a very powerful tool at backfilling what it thinks is reality. And if you shape that, because that's happening to people all the time right now, and we call it marketing. You know, it's being backfilled by what they think or these implicit biases. And over time, you just compress and you compress and you compress and you compress. What we do a little bit differently though is we honor the expansion, compress it down so it can fly. You know, you had a really beautiful analogy about a bow and arrow, you know, coming under great tension and it can fly. Um,
Yeah.
so anyhow,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, well, I was just going to say, you know, it's a proper application of those factors. And now you mentioned it being the event, as in like the in person, as one portion of that. There's also the front end, the months leading up, the months after, the careful selection of who comes into this arena. It's just the reality is it's not everybody's ready to face, which is ultimately going to be facing themselves, the truth of how they fit into the world. And the the magnitude of the gunk, you know, the blind spots they have. It's a heavy load. It's a big load. I think everyone should undertake in this journey. I believe that is the purpose of the human experience, is to take those so that we evolve. As we resolve those patterns, we'll learn new, better patterns for the universe, and we'll create in more complex ways. Because I think you know, us as a vessel, like a meat sack, is our job is to help the evolution of concepts around us, systems around us, and consciousness, the evolution of consciousness, eventually. And so yeah, I think that kind of right now, it's only through the deep compressions that we learn new levels of consciousness. Now, people do bypass this and not bypass it like as like a sidestep, with like plant medicines, things that can pull you to higher states of consciousness, show you that perspective. Um, but it's only through like the proper work that you'll expand that whole grouping of being able to sit with and develop your attitude within either a fear level consciousness or a love based one.
Yeah. I think all this work that's being done with veterans these days is really important when we talk about changing the paradigm of consciousness. And when we say consciousness, I don't think we've really defined it here yet, appropriately, which I think that would be a good exercise for us to do. But, it seems the data and the stories are telling us that the more one ventures into the underworld, the farther they can go in terms of growth. Now, that doesn't mean it always happens, but actually, it seems like a probability. It seems like your percentage and for your capacity to grow as a human is greater. And that's what Jeff was talking about. with that example of the bow and arrow, when we pull back the arrow and there's a lot of tension on that string there and we let it go, it goes farther if we pull it back farther to an extent, right? I mean, if we can go on with that analogy, if you pull it too hard, you're going to break, right? So there is a level of self-awareness to know what you're ready for and what you're not ready for. Just to bring it back to my own experience, there was some reason why, even though I was confronted with the trauma of my past and being alone and how that's been a problem, I wasn't quite ready to embrace it or to accept it until now, for whatever reason. I don't need to know what that reason is, but they come to us at the right time and the right place. And so I think that from a practical sense, when we start to see something showing up and it's starting to affect us, and the distraction just isn't, we know that we're distracting ourselves and that's just not hitting anymore and it's not going away, that's a good indicator that transformation is ready. Oh,
Yes.
sorry, I
Wow.
did want
There's
to
a
add on to
lot
that. So
there.
where I was going with that with the military, uh, because that is a form of collective trauma, right? It's a form of service and it's a form of a lot of other things, and it's also a form of trauma that a lot of people incur while they're there. This Veterans offer us a really cool bridge between our political systems, between socioeconomic communities, like differences in where people come from, right? People from all different backgrounds join at least the US and Canadian militaries. And to see the focus that's been placed on helping these people heal and grow is really exciting, because I don't even think that the institutions that are investing in these people know what they're doing. They're some of the most powerful people on this planet right now, given all of the stuff that's ready to be transmuted. And that's why we see a lot of veterans doing really good work. We're also seeing a lot of veterans and really like lots of people that have past traumas that are remarkable, that are like really heavy. We see a lot of them being stuck in that tension. So if we were to go more into
Yeah.
acceptance here, um, where would you go with that? Like, how could one start to let go of that arrow?
Well, you said it, right? There's a whole bunch of different backgrounds, which means a whole bunch of different life experience, which means a whole bunch of different genetic factors and all these things that play into why is it that some vets turn into heroin addicts and live on the street and others don't. And it's definitely nothing, my hand on my heart, I refuse to believe anything else. It's not that one isn't capable of these good deeds. It's that the pre-programming they have is just going to work against them either longer or in a lot of cases, all the way to the point of suicide. So they that awareness, some people lose the belief that they actually have agency in their life. Um, One of the really cool things about our programming is when people see, like when you step into something very difficult intentionally, you start to have like this, it's almost like a return to innocence in a way, but you start to realize like, oh, I do hold the pen of my life more than I thought. And also I wasn't holding the pen as much as I thought. To make this like make sense though with the term consciousness, I think consciousness is going to be ever evolving. That is to me the point of the universe. That's like, I know it's crazy to think, hey, someone knows the point of the universe, but that's just what I like to believe. I'm cool with believe, like hearing everyone else's beliefs and even changing my belief. I would love that. But it's, if you think of the body as an antenna and it's absorbing signals, you know, the easy ones are our five senses. Those are signals, quantum data that we're constantly gathering, milling about in our body and our mind through this sophisticated tool, and then creating an output. And that output could be nothing at all, which is usually what most people should do. But we also impact the environment around us by changing things, changing the entropic states, how the configuration is. And consciousness is, the more you have consciousness, the more you kind of move to enlightenment, which means your dance with those molecules, with that energy, creates less and less caustic, forceful, fear-based disturbances. And the more you raise your consciousness, the more the connections become strong, the more harmonious they are, and the more likely they are to take the evolution of the earth. I won't say the whole universe because into a positive direction. And you mentioned about the right place with that. That kind of goes back to the word fate. Fate to me is like the road that you can get on, the path that once you find your alignment, you can get on. And the more you move towards it, it's probably like an exponential curve. It never really crosses, but you always get more and more close. You get closer to it. And what happens with like the soldiers, at least, is they get caught in the feedback loop of constriction, which shapes their beliefs. And then what they do is they chase a new state, lots of them. So that chasing of the state could be through pure escapism, distractions, backfill any one of them, addictive patterns, drugs and alcohol. And then it shrinks them down. It shrinks their capability to find a new creative outlet. Not creative like I'm going to do art to feel good, but a creative way for them to incorporate those experiences and that constriction and bring it back out for themselves and for the world, to escape those feedback loops. Because that's what's cool about fear. It creates a feedback loop, does that so you can survive, but it can also go in overdrive. And, this isn't just with soldiers like you alluded to, Jess. It's every human on the planet. It's just soldiers get exposed to, some of the best and the worst of mankind. And it's difficult to make sense of very abnormal circumstances. And, this is like a part where, I fell into the trap of normalizing what war represents as an act of being a good guy, and like, yeah, I digress.
Okay. You left us on a cliffhanger there.
Yes. I
This
left
is
me
not
on a
turning into a
cliffhanger.
therapy session, so we'll end it at that. Yeah, but
Yeah,
just from an
yes.
outside perspective, I really do appreciate your willingness to look at something that was so important to you and is still important to you, and to have the willingness to have your opinion changed on what you spent so much of your life doing, while also not demonizing the the organization, the process, the experiences. And that's a big thing to do.
Yeah, I believe they call it a conversation. you know, Openly listening and being willing to change, and then knowing that people can hear you. Like, you mentioned my sister's kids at the beginning of this, and like her son he's young, he's 10, but he knows there's these factors that are revolving, but he's still building his communications and how he relates to the world. Um, and the only way we can work on that is a conversation. Well, what about this? What about that? And you evolve together. But like you said, once upon a time, and like once you close down to believing something else, that's usually, because people want that safety, that consistency.
Mm.
Because chaos can give the illusion of being scary, you know, and I relate to it when he was saying that. I was like, man, I remember being that age and being like, yeah, just help me out with some answers here, or give me some tools, and like looking back on it, I commend my parents. Like I won't go like into the school systems and beyond like the broader reach of um my relationships. I'll just start there. And like looking at from where they came from, I was like, holy moly, they really pushed the torch forward, and um
Hmm.
like I see the same thing with my sister and her kids. It's like it's such a beautiful relay race that we're playing out, we are playing out. Uh, and it can get tricky, right? Because the other thing that happens when people constrict, the most important letter to them in the vocabulary that becomes I. And so it's hard to like get out of that loop again, right? Because they're trying to make sense of reality in their own head. And it's like nobody really knows what's going on. So the last person you should trust is just you. I know that's kind of weird to say, but it's kind of true.
Sometimes. I mean, it's
Sometimes, and
contextual.
sometimes trust yourself. Yeah.
Definitely trust yourself. And then sometimes you're too in your own jar and you're suffocating. Yeah, I get
Yeah.
that.
It's
I
hard to
mean,
see the label when you're in the jar.
Yeah, you know what I just realized yesterday? I realized like I come from immigrant parents, at least one of them, and you too. And my mom never said she was an immigrant. She never used that word. And so in one sense, it was helpful because I never saw myself as first generation and identifying with a victim group, which can often be associated with that word. She posed it as I was brave and I was following my dream and I moved to the US. But on another hand, I think it was in its own sense a little bit damaging isn't the right word. It was just a little bit of a thing because there are elements of the immigrant experience that you and I are working with, but kind of have no idea about because our families didn't really communicate like that. The kinds of resources and the tools that are available to immigrant children don't jive with us because we weren't part of that community, but they are helpful too in their own enormous ways. Having language around certain things and understanding where ancestral wounding comes from, right? The immigrant community, the first generation community, they know a lot more about things that are passed on because that was something that was talked about. So I know we've talked a lot in this podcast. It's funny, we said we were only going to go 30 minutes. I don't know how long it's been, but a lot of this is acceptance, right? Understanding that where we come from matters, and it in some cases, in a lot of cases, influences the choices that we make. Becoming more aware of what those things are is a huge step. I'm not gonna say first step because I want to get in that conversation again, but it's a step that's early on. And so if I were to sum
Yes.
up what I feel like this podcast has been about is to be gentle on ourselves and to understand that if you're a human like us, you have some shit going on and that's okay. And the worst thing that you can do is pretend that it doesn't exist because that will just prolong whatever kind of problems are coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've been looking at it. I don't know if I already said it, but I love it. I'm going to say it again. Einstein said, like the mark of intelligence is the ability to change.
I love that. Yeah, easier said than done, but totally possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thank you for hanging in there with us. And I'm feeling like next time we're gonna go into the video mode instead of just audio. The problem is we start these early and I just don't look that great. Jeff looks awesome, but I'm in full head to toe sweatpants and a top knot. But next week, I'm putting on a face and we're gonna go on camera. Mostly because I don't want to edit all those
With the
pictures in. That's taking too long. So
which pictures?
oh, well, you haven't obviously watched the show on YouTube, but um, in the video version, I cut in images of the process, which takes a long time. So now we're just going to go to video, and it'll take me less time to do my makeup and put some clothes on than it will be for me to edit the show. So it's just
Yes.
practical
Plus, we don't want to give away the
maneuver.
secret sauce.
Right. I don't have that many pictures to show. All right, everybody, have a great week. You all have fun. Feel safe to dive in, find the people that you resonate with, and we will talk to you again soon.